87% of the fertilizer that grows American food comes from one country, Canada. And in March 2025, the Trump administration put a 25% tariff on it. Your grocery prices, your farm sector, and the stability of American agriculture were all on the line when that decision was made. What followed was not a prolonged standoff. It collapsed in 5 weeks. The 5 weeks are not the story. The 5 weeks are the proof. And the proof was already sitting 900 million years underground before anyone in Washington decided to run for office. The mineral is called potash. If you have never heard that word, here's what it means. Potash is a potassium-based compound mined from ancient underground salt deposits. It is one of the 3 essential nutrients that commercial agriculture depends on to produce food at scale. Corn needs it, soybeans need it, wheat needs it, cotton needs it. Without adequate potash applied to soil, crop yields fall. When crop yields fall, supply tightens. When supply tightens, food prices rise. And when a 25% tariff lands on the primary source of that mineral, the cost does not fall on the country being tariffed. It falls on the American farmer who has no alternative place to buy it. The United States Geological Survey made this explicit in March 2025, confirming data that agricultural planners and USDA officials had quietly understood since the 1960s. 87% of the potash used by American farmers originates from Saskatchewan, Canada, not from a diversified global supply chain, not from a mix of domestic and international sources. 87% from one Canadian province, 6 mines. Devonian-era salt deposits formed when the land that is now the Canadian prairies sat beneath a shallow inland sea 900 million years ago. That sea evaporated. The potassium concentrated. It hardened. It sank. And it sat there, undisturbed, until the 20th century created the mining technology to extract it. Saskatchewan holds approximately 1.1 billion tons of recoverable potash. The entire United States combined holds an estimated 200 million tons, most of it too deep, too low grade, or too structurally complex to mine at prices that can compete with Canadian production. The annual production ratio between the two countries is 36-1 in Canada's favor. That number did not come from a bilateral trade negotiation. It came from continental geology. Plate tectonics arrange the deposits the way they arrange them. Nothing in Washington changes that. The company that sits at the center of this geological reality is Nutrien, headquartered in Saskatoon. In 2024, Nutrien sold 14.4 million tons of potash, more than every other major producer on the planet combined. Nutrien is not simply the largest potash company in Canada. It is, by a substantial margin, the foundational pillar of global potash supply. And the largest customer base it serves is American agriculture. Now hold all of that in mind and look at what happened in March 2025. The Trump administration applied a 25% tariff on Canadian potash as part of a broader package of tariffs on Canadian goods. The stated logic was familiar. Tariff pressure creates negotiating leverage. Canada feels economic pain, comes to the table, and adjusts its position. That is how tariff strategy works when the conditions support it. You apply pressure to something the other side values, and the other side has to respond. The problem was that the conditions did not support it here, and the Republican farm state bloc understood that within days. Agricultural associations representing corn growers, soybean producers, wheat farmers, and cotton producers issued statements in rapid succession. The framing was consistent. A 25% tariff on Canadian potash was a 25% increase in the cost of growing American crops. Not a Canadian problem, an American problem. The tariff crossed the border, moved south, and landed on American farm operating budgets during a year when those budgets were already under severe strain. Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa did not issue a careful diplomatic statement. Grassley, one of the most institutionally powerful voices in American agricultural politics, made clear that this policy was damaging American agriculture and needed to be reversed. He was not alone. Farm state senators and agricultural associations from across the political spectrum aligned on the same position. This was not a partisan split. It was a unified signal from people who understand what fertilizer costs mean to American food production. The USDA's Prices Paid Index, which tracks what farmers actually pay for production inputs, tells the story in numbers. It moved from 139.9 in mid-2024 to 149.9 by June 2025. The Federal Reserve's Fertilizer Import Price Index jumped from 164.5 in December 2024 to 186.5 by September 2025. These are not abstract policy metrics. They are the difference between a farmer who finishes the year solvent and a farmer who does not. For American soybean producers, 2025 was shaping up to be their third consecutive year of net losses. A 25% fertilizer tariff in that environment is not a negotiating tool. It is a financial emergency. The tariff was cut from 25% to 10%. Then, within 5 weeks of its introduction, it was eliminated entirely. This story is moving into territory that most mainstream coverage isn't tracking closely enough. The CUSMA trade review is arriving in weeks, and the decisions being made right now will determine the terms of the US-Canada relationship for the next decade. Subscribe so you are ahead of this, not reading catch-up summaries after the consequences are already set. The administration did not quietly move on after the reversal. The political pressure to find an alternative supply solution was real, and the search for that alternative is where the story becomes most revealing about the actual structural position the United States is in. The most prominent domestic option was a proposed potash mine in Michigan. Supporters of the project pointed to it as evidence that American production could, over time, reduce dependency on Canadian supply. That argument has a foundation. The project is real, but the timeline is not. The Michigan mine is not expected to reach production until the early 2030s at the earliest, and even at full capacity, it is projected to yield approximately 800,000 tons annually. Annual American demand sits at 12 million tons. 800,000 tons is 6.5% of the gap. That is not a supply solution. That is a symbol. A separate feasibility study in Utah examined another potential source. When that project's projected output is measured against total American demand, it covers approximately 2.5%. Combined, the most advanced domestic development scenarios in the conversation do not approach 9% of current annual need within any timeline that matters to a farmer planting next spring. There was a third option, and it requires context to understand properly. Belarus is one of the world's meaningful potash producers. For the past several years, the United States and the European Union have maintained heavy sanctions on Belarus in response to the Lukashenko government's domestic political repression and its facilitation of Russian military operations in Ukraine. Those sanctions effectively locked Belarusian potash out of Western markets. In December 2025, a deal was brokered. Sanctions relief tied to a prisoner release arrangement that theoretically reopened Belarus as a supply option for American buyers. Industry analysts examined the arrangement carefully. Their assessment was unanimous. Even with sanctions lifted, rebuilding Belarusian potash export infrastructure, logistics networks, and Western commercial relationships from their current degraded state to meaningful scale would require 3 to 5 years minimum. This is not a matter of political will. It is a matter of physical infrastructure, port capacity, rail logistics, and commercial contract cycles. You cannot redirect a global commodity supply chain in a season. You rebuild it over years. A farmer named David Eisner from western Kansas spent 23 years growing wheat. He is not an economist, and he did not appear in any policy briefing. He appeared in a regional agricultural publication in April 2025, after the tariff was first announced. He said he calculated what the 25% tariff would add to his fertilizer costs for the coming season. The number came out to just under $11,000 on his operation. He said he stood in his kitchen looking at that calculation and thought about the fact that wheat futures were already below his break-even point. He said he called his senator's office that same afternoon. He was not the only farmer who made that call that week. The volume of constituent calls to farm state congressional offices during the first 2 weeks of the tariff was, by multiple accounts, among the heaviest on any agricultural policy issue in recent years. That is not abstraction. That is a kitchen table conversation turning into a phone call, turning into a senator's office calling the White House. Then came December 8th, 2025, and what happened on that day deserves careful attention, because what the administration did was not a single announcement. It was 2 contradictory announcements made simultaneously. The Trump administration announced a $12 billion emergency farm aid package, and in the same statement threatened new and, in the president's language, very severe tariffs on Canadian fertilizer. The agricultural press did not need long to identify the contradiction. You cannot announce emergency financial relief for farmers damaged by rising input costs and in the same breath threaten to raise those costs again without revealing something significant about the position you are in. If the alternative supply chains were real, the aid package would be unnecessary. If the tariff threat was credible, the aid package would be inadequate. The dual announcement said both things at once. The agricultural industry heard it clearly. Matt Simpson, the CEO of a Brazilian potash company, meaning one of Nutrien's actual competitors in the global market, a company with commercial interest in Canada losing American business, said publicly that American tariffs on Canadian potash would hurt American farmers, not Canada. Read that again. The competitor said the tariff doesn't work. That is not a partisan position. That is a market participant who would benefit from Canada losing American customers, telling you the economics point the wrong direction. William Pellerin, a Toronto-based trade lawyer who has handled cross-border agricultural trade for years, made the same assessment. The structural weight in this specific commodity, he noted, does not point toward Canada. It points inward. The leverage flows toward the seller. When there is no alternative seller, there is no leverage for the buyer. Do you think the United States has a national security obligation to build domestic potash production regardless of cost? Or is dependency on Canada simply not a strategic risk given the depth of the alliance? That is not a rhetorical question. It is the actual policy decision that will shape American food security for the next 2 decades, and it is not getting the debate it deserves. Here is something worth sitting with. The USDA has tracked American dependency on Canadian potash since the 1960s. This was not information that surfaced from an intelligence brief or emerged from a trade dispute. American agricultural planners have known for more than 60 years that this dependency exists, and that no commercially viable domestic alternative was within reach. No administration in that span of time, Republican or Democrat, pro-trade or protectionist, succeeded in building a meaningful domestic supply alternative. The geology was always the answer to the question of why not. Saskatchewan's deposits are what they are. American deposits are what they are. Policy can accelerate investment at the margins. It cannot change what the ground holds. There is a counterpoint worth understanding clearly, because this story is not simply a tale of clean Canadian leverage over a helpless American administration. The Trump administration's broader tariff campaign on Canada was never constructed around potash alone. The target was a wide trade relationship: lumber, dairy, aluminum, steel, auto parts, energy. The potash reversal does not mean the overall strategy failed. It means one specific element of it encountered a wall it could not get past. Whether the administration extracts meaningful concessions in other sectors before the CUSMA review deadline of July 1st, 2026, now weeks away, is still an open question. And Canada's posture, while notable for its calm, carries its own pressures. Nutrien and the Canadian potash industry have a fundamental interest in stable, long-term American market access. Escalation from either side disrupts commercial relationships that both sides depend on. The current approach from Ottawa and from Saskatchewan's government has been measured. Keep selling, maintain supply, say very little. But measured responses do not guarantee permanent stability. The July deadline changes the dynamic. For American viewers outside of agriculture, here is why this is not just a farm story. American food prices are not insulated from American farm economics. When input costs rise, when net farm income falls by more than $30 billion in a single projected year, when soybean farmers absorb a third consecutive loss year, those pressures do not stay on the farm. They move through the supply chain. Not immediately, not uniformly, but they move. The cost of growing food is embedded in the cost of buying it. Every grocery receipt is downstream of a fertilizer price. For Canadian viewers, the picture is different but equally consequential. Canada's potash sector is not merely a provincial economic driver. It is a structural asset in the country's negotiating position with the United States. The July CUSMA review will determine the terms of cross-border commerce for years ahead. The potash episode gives Canadian negotiators something concrete. Not a weapon to be wielded, but a data point in a conversation about where the real weight sits in this relationship. The mines are still running. The trains are still moving south. Nutrien is, right now, building a new export terminal in Washington state. A long-term commercial infrastructure commitment to American customers that was not paused, not scaled back, and not canceled during any point in the tariff dispute. That is a company investing in market durability. If you believe the US-Canada trade relationship deserves reporting that goes deeper than who scored points in a press conference, that covers the structural reality underneath the political noise, this channel was built for that audience. Subscribe and be part of the coverage that actually tells you what is happening, not just what it looked like. The broader lesson of the 5-week potash reversal is one that extends well beyond fertilizer. Tariffs work when the thing being taxed can be replaced, rerouted, or sourced elsewhere by the buyer. They work when optionality exists and when applying a cost to one supply source pushes buyers toward a viable alternative. When the thing being taxed cannot be replaced at scale in any commercially relevant timeframe, the tariff does not generate leverage, it generates cost. And the cost lands on the side that cannot find an alternative, which in this case was American agriculture. 900 million years of geological formation is not a negotiating chip, it is a physical condition. The Devonian salt beds under Saskatchewan do not respond to tariff schedules, they do not adjust to press conference language, they do not move to accommodate CUSMA review deadlines. They are what they are. They hold what they hold. The global food system, including the American food system, has organized itself around that reality for 60 years. 5 weeks of tariff pressure did not change it. The 5 weeks that it took to reverse the potash tariff are not simply a political outcome to be defended or criticized. They are a measurement of the distance between policy confidence and geological reality, between leverage claimed and leverage available, between what a tariff is supposed to do and what it actually did. That measurement is now part of the public record. It will be in the room at every trade negotiation between the United States and Canada for the foreseeable future. The administration has signaled that new pressure on Canadian fertilizer remains a possibility. The CUSMA review arrives in weeks. The farm state bloc, the agricultural industry, and the foreign policy establishment are all watching the same deadline. What is decided at that table will tell us whether the 5-week reversal was an isolated adjustment or the opening chapter of a longer reckoning with what American trade strategy can and cannot achieve. The current answer to the question of whether Canada's potash can be replaced is still the same answer it was before the tariff was announced. No, not this decade, not at scale. Not in any time frame that matters to the farmer making input decisions for next season. In my next video, I am covering the CUSMA review itself, what both sides are bringing to the table, what Canada is prepared to walk away from, and one specific sector the American negotiating team is targeting that almost no one in mainstream media is discussing yet. What I found changes how you see this entire relationship.